It was the first race of the 2023 Formula One season, and all eyes were on the Albert Park circuit in Melbourne. Rookie driver George Russell had done a remarkable job to qualify his Mercedes at the front of the pack, giving fans hope that their beloved Silver Arrows would break their winless streak and take home their first victory since 2021. But with the Australian Grand Prix only 3 laps in, those hopes were dashed when Russell pulled over at the side of the track and flames started coming out from his car. He had been forced to retire due to an engine issue that had suddenly occurred. But what was the real reason behind it? What forces had conspired to take him out and dash Mercedes' hopes for victory? Before we get started, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel, F1 Racing, and join our community of the F1 world. So let's go. George Russell is a young British driver who has been making waves in Formula One since his debut in 2019. He achieved a dream qualifying session at the Australian Grand Prix this year, taking pole position and setting off into the first corner to take the lead of the race and give Mercedes fans hopes of a famous victory amid all their struggles. This was despite the preseason changes and an unpredictable weekend, with many people expecting Russell to have a difficult time when up against the established top drivers. Unfortunately, his race didn't last long, as an engine issue forced him to retire from the track in 7th place, setting off a huge fire in his W14, which all but ended his chances of glory. Despite this, he's still seen as one of the most exciting drivers on the grid and is sure to be a major player in the championship. The Australian Grand Prix has always been a special race for Formula One, with its iconic backdrop and, unsurprisingly, many memorable moments over the years. Its first Grand Prix was held back in 1928, and since then, it's provided many of the most dramatic and intense moments in F1 history. This year's race was no exception, with plenty of drama and excitement from start to finish. From pole position to a huge engine fire, there was something for everyone this weekend at Albert Park. Russell had a successful qualifying session at the Australian Grand Prix, managing to take the lead on the first lap and giving Mercedes fans hope of a famous victory amid their struggles. His performance was impressive, as he managed to get past his competitors in the tight first corner and make his way into pole position for the race. He was able to make the most of his tires and drive with confidence as he chose clean lines for overtaking and pushing forward. He managed to keep in front for the first lap until a red flag was issued due to Alex Albon crashing on the track, forcing all cars back into the pits. Russell had already begun to move up from 7th place, but his race was soon ended when an engine problem caused his Mercedes to set on fire, ending any chance of a win. Despite Mercedes' struggles this season, Russell showed true potential and promise in the qualifying session. That sadly wasn't able to be capitalized upon due to the unfortunate circumstances he encountered. Mercedes fans were hopeful for a famous victory at the Australian GP 2023 after George Russell qualified in the pole position and took the lead in the first lap. After Mercedes' struggles in recent years, they were looking forward to seeing Russell take them to a much-needed win. The Brit was driving confidently and looked set to make it all the way to the finish line. However, it was not to be, and any hopes of a famous victory were dashed when Russell pulled over at the side of the track with an engine problem and flames coming out of his W14. In just a few laps, Mercedes' dreams had gone up in smoke as their star driver became the third one to retire from the race. It was a devastating disappointment for Mercedes, who would have to wait another year before they could finally get back on top of the podium. After the first lap, Russell had an ideal position, taking the lead in the race and giving Mercedes fans hope of a famous victory amid all their struggles. However, his strategy was inadvertently ruined when a red flag was waved before he could pit for tires again. This gave everyone else in the race a free tire change without losing any positions, leaving Russell frustrated and further back on the grid. Sadly, his race was then ended prematurely by an engine fire, and he had to quickly get out of his car before things got any worse. It was a heartbreaking end for Russell, who'd been looking so strong in qualifying, but will now have to pick himself up for the next race with his dreams of a Melbourne win having gone up in smoke. Charles Leclerc crashed on the third corner of the first lap, ending his race after just a few seconds. It was an unfortunate but early indication of how things would go for Mercedes in this Australian GP. The incident resulted in a safety car being deployed, and while it was only out for a couple of laps, it gave everyone else an opportunity to take advantage of the situation and make some strategic moves. There was still a lot of racing left to go, and it seemed like Mercedes could still challenge for victory, but fate had other ideas for George Russell. His engine issues ended his race prematurely and meant he would not be able to add another impressive performance on top of his qualifying success. It all started with Charles Leclerc's crash, and it was a sign of things to come. The The safety car had only been out for a couple of laps when Alex Albon crashed, causing the race to be red flagged with too much gravel left on the track, which needed to be swept away. This meant that Russell's strategy of taking the lead and giving Mercedes fans hope of a victory was ruined as he pitted just seconds before the accident and dropped from first place to 7th. Everyone else was now able to change their tires in the pit lane without losing any positions, leaving him frustrated at being on the back foot as his plans had been thrown out the window. The race soon came to a halt as marshals got to work clearing away the debris left by Albon's crash. This was a frustrating time for Russell and Mercedes, who could only hope for better luck in the next race. The Australian GP was red flagged due to too much gravel left on the track that needed to be swept away. This cost Russell his strategy of fighting back up the grid and left him feeling frustrated. The red flag also meant that Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were able to race each other for the lead as soon as the race resumed, leaving Mercedes with less of a chance of winning in Melbourne than they had originally hoped for. This was further compounded when Russell's engine issue forced him to retire from the race and put an end to his charge. It just goes to show that sometimes a few moments can change the course of a race. In this case, it was Russell's engine issue combined with the red flag for too much gravel on the track that left him out of contention in Australia. Just as it seemed like Russell was on course to take the lead in the Australian GP, his afternoon began to take a turn for the worse. He pitted under a safety car just seconds away from a red flag that allowed everyone else to change their tires in the pit lane without losing any positions. This meant that he had sacrificed first place for no gain, and he was left floundering back in 7th place. Russell was understandably frustrated with this turn of events and expressed his anger over the team radio. He began the task of regaining lost ground, but soon after he was forced to retire due to an engine problem that ended his race early in a blaze of flame. It was a moment of disappointment for the British driver and for Mercedes, whose hopes of winning in Melbourne had been extinguished. Russell had begun to fight back and try to move up the field, but his race was ended abruptly when he alerted his team over the radio that it felt like an engine problem. Flames quickly began emerging from the back of his car, and he had to be quick to get out before any further damage was done. The failure seemed all too coincidental, coming after Mercedes' strategy had been ruined and they had fallen down in the order. Russell was now out of the Australian GP with his Mercedes in flames, leaving fans wondering what could have been if not for this engine issue. It certainly left Mercedes far from confident about their future prospects as Verstappen drove away into the distance at the front of the pack. Max Verstappen took advantage of Russell's misfortune as he quickly seized the lead from Lewis Hamilton. With fresh tires and a clear track ahead of him, the Dutchman powered away from the rest of the field with such speed that it seemed like no one else was even involved in the race. He carved his way through corners with ease as if he was on a different track from the rest of the drivers. It seemed like his victory was inevitable, and Mercedes' dreams of winning in Melbourne were slipping away with every second. But Hamilton stayed close behind him, never allowing Verstappen to put too much distance between them. It looked like this race was far from over yet. With tensions rising, the fans watched as the drivers battled it out at the front of the grid, a thrilling spectacle that was sure to become even more exciting in the laps ahead. Unfortunately, they were left disappointed, as Russell's engine failure meant that Verstappen didn't have any real competition, and he eventually sped away into the distance, leaving the rest of the field behind. Ultimately, it was Verstappen's day, as he won his first Australian Grand Prix, and Mercedes were left with their dreams unfulfilled once again. Despite the disappointment of having his race ended, Mercedes fans were left wondering what would have happened if George Russell hadn't experienced engine failure. The Brit had been so close to achieving a famous victory with Mercedes at the Australian Grand Prix 2023, and it seemed all but certain that he was going to take the win before his car set on fire. It promised to be a thrilling race, and the sight of Russell at the front was something never seen before in Formula One racing. The drama unfolded in Melbourne as it seemed that Mercedes had missed an opportunity to take the checkered flag. Had Russell not been affected by engine trouble, he could well have been in with a chance of taking the race win. As it was, instead of being at the front and fighting for victory, he had to watch from the sidelines as his teammate, Lewis Hamilton, inherited the lead and went on to claim his third victory of the season. Despite the disappointment of missing out on a potential win, Russell showed great sportsmanship by congratulating Hamilton on his win and thanking his team for the hard work. The young British driver will undoubtedly be eager to bounce back in the next race and show what he's capable of. As for Mercedes, they'll be hoping to continue their winning streak and maintain their position as one of the top teams in Formula One. George commented that despite having a fantastic weekend with great performances in qualifying, the start, the restart, and strategic decision-making, it's disappointing to be in this position now. For Russell and the Mercedes team, the focus will now be on identifying the cause of the engine failure and ensuring that it doesn't happen again. They'll also be looking to make further improvements to the car, particularly in terms of reliability, to give themselves the best chance of success in the upcoming races. As for the drivers in the championship, the Australian GP was a mixed bag. Max Verstappen, who took the victory, will be feeling confident going into the next race, knowing that he has the pace to challenge for the title. Lewis Hamilton, on the other hand, will be disappointed with his performance in Melbourne and will be looking to bounce back in the next race. For the rest of the field, the Australian GP was a reminder of how unpredictable a sport can be. With multiple retirements and unexpected twists and turns, it was a chaotic start to the season. Drivers will now be looking to regroup and refocus for the upcoming races, knowing that anything can happen in Formula One. Overall, the Australian GP was a tough but valuable learning experience for all the drivers and teams. They'll be taking the lessons learned from Melbourne and applying them to the next race, determined to come out on top in what promises to be an exciting and competitive season of racing. Although it was a day to forget for George Russell and Mercedes, as their hopes of a podium finish went up in flames at the Australian Grand Prix, Russell had shown his potential with a strong start, but a combination of red flag, a safety car, and an engine failure ultimately ended his race prematurely. Despite the disappointment, Russell remains a promising young talent, and the team will undoubtedly look to bounce back in the coming races. The incident also serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of Formula One and the importance of strategy and reliability in the pursuit of success. As the championship continues, the focus will be on which team and driver can stay the course and come out on top in what promises to be another exciting season of racing. So what do you think was the cause of Russell's car's failure at the Australian Grand Prix? And will George be able to show his true talent in the next races? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.